my little girl returned from Grandma's and quietly said, "Grandma told me to wait outside while they went shopping." She'd been there for hours, alone. I didn't panic. I raced to the house, walked in. And without thinking, It started as any ordinary weekend. I was finishing some work around the house when my daughter's car pulled into the driveway. Usually, when she comes home from visiting her grandmother, she bursts in with stories, excited, laughing, full of energy. But today, she was different. She hung up her coat slowly, her small shoulders slumped, and she didn't speak at first. I knew immediately that something was wrong. There was a heaviness in her eyes, a silence that felt too loud. Finally, in a barely audible voice, she said, "Mom, Grandma told me to wait outside while they went shopping." I froze. My mind spun. "Wait outside? For how long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She whispered, "4 hours. 4 hours. Alone. In the driveway. In the cold." The thought made my chest tighten, my heart hammering in my ears. Rage, fear, and disbelief all collided inside me, but I knew screaming or panicking wouldn't help her. I grabbed my keys, threw on my coat, and bolted to the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Every red light, every pedestrian felt like a slow-motion nightmare, and yet I couldn't drive fast enough. My mind raced with every possible scenario. Had something happened to her while she waited? Was she scared? Did anyone see her out there? When I arrived at my daughter's grandmother's house, everything looked deceptively normal. The front door was closed. The lights were dim. There wasn't a sound in the house. It should have been welcoming, warm, but it felt empty. Cold. Wrong. I didn't knock. I didn't even pause. I walked in. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through a nightmare I couldn't wake from. My eyes scanned the living room, the hallway, the kitchen. And then I saw her. Sitting quietly on the couch, holding a single stuffed animal, her eyes wide but calm, staring at the floor as if waiting for something. 4 hours alone, and she had barely moved, barely cried. My heart shattered. I ran to her and scooped her up, holding her tightly. She buried her face in my shoulder, small arms clinging to me like I could shield her from the whole world. "Mommy!" "I waited like she said," she murmured. "I know, sweetheart. I know," I whispered, my voice trembling. I could feel every ounce of fear, anger, and love colliding inside me. My mind screamed at me to confront her grandmother, to demand answers, but at that moment, all I cared about was my daughter. We sat on the couch for what felt like hours. I stroked her hair, asked if she was hurt, if she was scared, if she wanted to talk. She nodded quietly, finally letting out a soft sob, the weight of 4 hours alone finally catching up with her. I held her, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. Mommy's here. I promise." Later, as I reflected on that day, I realized just how quickly life can show you what truly matters. 4 hours alone might not seem long to some, but to a child, it can feel like a lifetime. I made a silent vow that day: no one, not even family, would ever make my daughter feel invisible, unheard, or alone. And that's when I realized something else: how resilient children are. She survived those hours quietly, patiently. But resilience doesn't mean we should ever test it. Children need us to protect them, to fight for them, even when it feels inconvenient. Even when it's uncomfortable. That night, after tucking her into bed, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You never have to wait outside alone again." She smiled faintly, and in that small, fragile smile, I found a mixture of relief, love, and an unspoken understanding that some lessons are learned the hard way, but love and protection are always worth fighting for. I shared this story because sometimes the most ordinary days hide the most extraordinary lessons. And sometimes, we don't scream or rage, but we act. And acting in love, in protection, in instinct, that's what truly matters. I couldn't stop shaking as I held her in my arms. Every fiber of my being was on high alert. I kept thinking, how could anyone leave a child alone for 4 hours? My mind ran through worst-case scenarios. What if she had wandered off? What if something had happened in the driveway? What if she had been scared, and nobody noticed? I looked down at her tiny hands clutching the stuffed animal, a little rabbit she had slept with since she was a baby. It was covered in little threads and dirt from where she had held it outside. My chest tightened even more. I had to calm myself, but all I wanted to do was scream, confront, demand answers. But first, I needed to make sure she was okay. I sat her on the couch, pulled a blanket around her shoulders, and made her a cup of hot chocolate. She sipped it slowly, still quiet, still processing everything. And as I watched her, a wave of guilt and rage washed over me simultaneously. I thought about what I would have done if she had gotten hurt, if she had cried and no one had been there to comfort her. And that thought, it made me furious. Not just at the situation, but at the people who were supposed to care for her. My protective instincts kicked into overdrive. "Why did they make you wait outside?" I asked gently, trying not to scare her further. "They said the store was crowded," she whispered. "And they didn't want me inside." I couldn't believe it. The more she spoke, the more I felt a mixture of horror and disbelief. My little girl had been told to sit outside, in the cold, for hours, as if her safety and comfort didn't matter. I paused and looked at her, really looked at her, the tiny, fragile human who trusted the world around her completely. And I realized something terrifying. Children are more vulnerable than we often realize, even when we think they're resilient. After a few minutes, I asked her if she wanted to talk about what she felt while she was outside. She shook her head slowly, and then her eyes welled up with tears. "I was lonely, and a little scared," she admitted. "But I waited like Grandma said." And that's when my heart broke all over again. She had been brave, patient, and obedient, but at what cost? The thought that she felt invisible, even for a moment, made me ache inside. I held her for a long time, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. You never have to be alone like that again. Mommy will always protect you." That night, as I tucked her into bed, I sat beside her for hours. I replayed every moment in my head, the drive to the house, opening the door, seeing her sitting there, waiting patiently. I asked myself over and over, how could anyone think this was acceptable? And yet, in the middle of the fear, the anger, the heartbreak, there was one undeniable truth. My daughter had taught me something about resilience, about patience, and about trust. But more importantly, she had reminded me of my role as a parent, to fight fiercely, even when the fight is uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient. I want everyone watching this to take a moment and think, if it had been your child, how would you have felt? Would you have rushed in like I did? Would you have demanded answers? Because the truth is, sometimes ordinary days hide extraordinary moments of bravery, both for the children and the parents who love them. And sometimes the loudest lesson we learn isn't through words, it's through the silent courage of a little girl waiting outside quietly, for hours, hoping someone would notice. I've shared this story not just to tell you what happened, but to remind you of something critical. Never underestimate the impact of small moments of neglect, and never underestimate the power of love and protection when a child's safety is at stake. From that day forward, I promised myself, and my daughter, that she would never feel invisible again. And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this: children notice everything. They remember everything. And the world we create around them shapes their courage, their trust, and their heart. So next time you see a child alone, waiting quietly, remember, bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a little heart waiting to be noticed. And the best thing we can do? Be there, fiercely, unconditionally, always. The next morning, I woke up early, long before my daughter. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying yesterday's events, the cold driveway, the hours she had spent alone, the quiet bravery in her eyes. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, staring at the empty street, trying to calm myself. But nothing could erase the image of her little figure, sitting there all alone, waiting for someone who should have been watching her. When she came downstairs, she was quieter than usual. I offered her breakfast, but she barely touched it. I watched her, my heart heavy. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She had experienced something no child should ever endure, and even though she tried to be brave, I could see the worry lingering behind her small smile. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. She became more cautious, hesitant to trust adults outside our immediate family. She asked questions I hadn't heard before. "Do I always have to wait if someone says so? What if they forget about me?" Each question pierced my heart. I realized then that trauma doesn't always arrive like a storm. It can creep in quietly, changing the way a child sees the world, even in small ways. And as a parent, it was my responsibility to rebuild her sense of safety, brick by brick, hug by hug, word by word. We spent the next few weeks creating new routines. No more leaving her alone, not for even a minute. I made sure she had a voice in every plan, every visit. We role-played scenarios. What would you do if someone asked you to wait alone? I wanted her to know she had the right to say no, to demand attention, to feel safe at all times. And slowly, I saw the change. Her laughter returned. Her stories came back, brighter and longer than before. But every so often, I would catch her glancing at the door, her little mind checking if the world was safe. And I would kneel down, hold her hand, and remind her, "I'm here. I will always be here." That day also changed me. I became more aware of how easily children can be overlooked, even by people we trust. It taught me vigilance, patience, and the importance of listening, not just hearing. Because what I learned is this: children tell us everything, not always in words, but in their silence, their hesitation, their quiet resilience. And if we don't notice, the consequences can last far longer than a single afternoon. Months passed, and the memory of that day remained vivid, not as a source of shame or anger, but as a reminder of what matters most: protection, presence, and unconditional love. I told her story carefully, sharing it with friends, family, and even teachers so that no child would have to sit outside alone, unnoticed, while someone else decides what's okay. Even now, when I watch her play, laughing freely, I think about that day. And I know that while the world can be cruel, our response, our love, our vigilance, our courage, can be even stronger. So to everyone listening, watch your children closely, listen carefully, and act immediately if something feels wrong. Because sometimes, a child's silence speaks louder than words, and being present, truly present, can change everything. That's the story of my little girl, the day she waited outside alone, and how one parent's determination and love turned fear into protection, loneliness into safety, and silence into a lesson for life. Weeks turned into months, but the memory of that day never left me. Every time my daughter left the house, even for a few minutes, I felt a subtle knot in my stomach. I realized it wasn't just fear, it was a newfound vigilance, a parent's instinct sharpened to a razor's edge. And she carried her own quiet memories. At first, I noticed small things. She hesitated at doors, looked around before trusting anyone, lingered in hallways as if waiting for approval. She had survived 4 hours alone, but her mind had stored every second. I couldn't erase it. I could only build safety around her, layer by layer. We began new routines together. Morning hugs that lasted longer, bedtime talks that dove deeper, questions that she was encouraged to ask, no matter how small. I made sure she knew her voice mattered. And gradually, she began to trust the world again. But it wasn't instant. Every time we approached a parking lot, she would glance around and ask softly, "Mom, can we stay together this time?" I realized how deeply children absorb the world around them. The silence she endured wasn't just an empty moment, it was a lesson etched into her young mind. And as a parent, I learned a profound truth: protection is not just about preventing accidents. It's about being present, emotionally and physically, every single moment. Her resilience inspired me in ways I didn't expect. Watching her continue to smile, play, and trust me again was both a relief and a humbling reminder. Children are strong, But strength doesn't mean invulnerability. And we, as parents, cannot take their trust for granted. I also had to confront her grandmother. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. Calmly, I explained how unacceptable it was to leave my daughter alone, how it had affected her, and what could happen if it happened again. There was defensiveness at first, but eventually, the seriousness of the situation sank in. Boundaries were set, rules clarified, and the safety of my child became non-negotiable. That experience taught me something I want everyone to understand: trauma doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it creeps into a child's mind quietly, through moments that adults may consider small or inconsequential. Waiting outside for 4 hours may seem trivial to some, but to a child, it can feel endless, terrifying, and lonely. I share this story not to shame, not to blame, but to remind parents and caregivers: pay attention. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, act immediately. A child's silence is not emptiness, it's communication. And the way we respond can shape their trust, their courage, and their understanding of love for the rest of their lives. Months later, as I watched her play in the backyard, laughing and free, I realized that her bravery was not only surviving those 4 hours, it was allowing herself to trust again. And I knew that my role, as her mother, was to make sure the world never made her wait alone like that again. Every hug, every reassurance, every bedtime conversation was more than affection, it was restoration. Slowly she rebuilt her trust, and in turn, I rebuilt mine in the people around her. And I learned that being a parent means never letting silence go unnoticed, never assuming that someone else will protect what matters most. Sometimes, I still think back to that day, to the quiet figure sitting outside, the stuffed animal clutched tightly in her arms. And every time, I promise myself, silently but firmly, no child under my care will ever feel invisible. No child will ever have to wait alone. And I will always be there. Because bravery is quiet. Courage is patience. And love, the relentless, fierce, never-ending kind of love, is what truly keeps a child safe. Weeks passed, but I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there, alone. It haunted me in quiet moments, while doing laundry, washing dishes, even driving. My mind would replay it over and over, each time sharper, her little hands clutching the stuffed animal, her eyes wide and patient, her body still, waiting for someone who should have been there. I realized that day how fragile trust is. Children give it freely, completely, without hesitation, but it can be broken in an instant. And once broken, rebuilding it takes more than words. It takes presence, consistency, and relentless reassurance. 4 days she stayed close to me. She held my hand while walking, insisted I sit beside her at meals, and asked constant questions about what-if situations. Each question was a small echo of that long afternoon. Mom, will you always come if I wait? Mom, what if someone forgets me? I had to confront my own guilt. As her mother, I couldn't protect her from everything, but I realized I could shape the environment to make her feel safe, seen, and heard. I began monitoring every visit, every interaction with family and friends. Boundaries weren't optional anymore, they were mandatory. I also had to address the grandmother. That conversation was hard. There was defensiveness, excuses, and even denial at first. But I stayed calm, steady, and firm. I explained exactly what had happened, how it had affected my daughter, and what could happen if it happened again. I demanded respect for my child's well-being. And slowly, I saw that the message sank in. Over the next few months, I watched my daughter regain her confidence, slowly reclaiming the innocence that had been stolen during those 4 hours. Laughter returned. She told stories again. She trusted me, and eventually others, a little more each day. But sometimes, when she glanced at a doorway or the car, I could see a flicker of that old fear, reminding me that healing is a process, not an instant fix. I learned that courage comes in many forms. Her bravery wasn't just in waiting alone, it was in trusting again, in asking questions, and learning to feel safe. And my role as a parent became even clearer: to protect, to teach boundaries, and to never allow anyone to diminish her sense of worth or security. That experience also reshaped me. I became more aware of every interaction in her life, more vigilant, more present. I realized that parenting isn't just love, it's vigilance, advocacy, and action. And sometimes, it means confronting uncomfortable truths, even in people you trust. Months later, as I watched her play in the backyard, free and joyful, I remembered that afternoon. I thought of her quiet patience, her resilience, and the silent lessons we both learned. And I made another silent vow: I would never let fear or inattention put her in a situation where she felt invisible again. Her story is a reminder to every parent, guardian, and adult: never underestimate the impact of small moments. Waiting 4 hours may seem insignificant, but to a child, it is a lifetime. Their silence is communication, their patience is bravery, and their trust is sacred. Protect it. Honor it. And above all, be present. Because love is not just what we feel, it's what we act on. It's the urgency in our steps, the firmness in our boundaries, the warmth in our hugs. And in that love, children find not only safety, but the courage to grow, trust, and thrive. Even now, years later, I can still picture that quiet figure sitting outside. And every time I do, I remember one immutable truth: being present, fiercely, fully, without hesitation, can change a life forever. Weeks turned into months, yet the memory of that day never left me. Even in the quietest moments, making dinner, folding laundry, or sitting in my car, I could still see her little figure, waiting outside. It wasn't just a memory, it was a haunting echo of what could have been. I began noticing the subtle ways that afternoon had changed her. She clung a little tighter to my hand. She hesitated at doorways. She asked questions that were small, but sharp. "Mom, will anyone ever leave me again?" Each question cut through me, a reminder that 4 hours alone can leave invisible scars. I realized something profound: trust is fragile. Children give it completely, without hesitation, but once broken, it takes time, patience, and unwavering consistency to rebuild. And as her mother, I felt an immense responsibility, not just to rebuild trust, but to protect her from ever being placed in that vulnerable position again. I became hyper-aware of every interaction she had. I watched her playdates, visits with relatives, even ordinary errands. Every adult around her was no longer just safe. By default, they had to earn my trust. Boundaries weren't negotiable anymore. They were essential. The hardest conversation came with her grandmother. At first, there was defensiveness. Excuses? Even denial. But I stayed calm, clear, and firm. I explained what had happened, how it affected my daughter, and what would be unacceptable moving forward. It wasn't easy, and there were moments I wanted to scream, but I knew that losing my composure would not protect my child. Slowly, the gravity of the situation was acknowledged, and boundaries were finally respected. Over time, I watched my daughter reclaim her confidence. She laughed again. She shared stories. She trusted me, and eventually others, with caution but courage. Still, in moments of transition, entering a room, leaving the house, there was a flicker of hesitation, a reminder of that day's trauma. Healing was not instant. It was gradual, like a fragile plant growing after a storm. I learned that true bravery isn't always loud. Her bravery was in waiting quietly, in trusting again, in allowing herself to feel safe despite what had happened. And my role as a parent was not just to love her, but to fiercely advocate for her, protect her, and ensure her world felt secure. I also realized the broader lesson: trauma often hides in small moments. A child waiting outside for 4 hours may not scream, but the impact lasts. Their silence speaks volumes, their patience is courageous, and their trust is sacred. Even months later, as she played freely in the backyard, I sometimes caught her looking toward the door, a faint echo of fear in her eyes. And every time I knelt beside her, held her hand, and whispered, "I'm here. Always. You are never alone." That day changed me too. I became vigilant, present, and unyielding in my commitment to her safety. Love became action. Protection became a daily practice. Boundaries became non-negotiable. And the quiet courage of my little girl became a lesson I will never forget. Children notice everything, even when we think they don't, and our presence, or absence, shapes them profoundly. Her story is a warning, a reminder, and a call to action for anyone caring for a child. Never underestimate small moments. Never assume that because a child is quiet, they are okay. Their silence is communication. Their patience is bravery. And our role is to notice, to act, to protect. Because love is not just what we feel, it is what we do. It is the urgency in our steps, the firmness in our boundaries, the warmth in our embrace. And in that love, children learn courage, trust, and the profound safety of being truly seen. Even now, years later, I can still picture her small, patient figure outside. And every time I do, I make a promise, to her, to myself, and to every child who depends on us: you will never wait alone. You will never feel invisible. I will always be here. Even now, years later, I still remember that afternoon vividly. I can see her small figure outside, clutching her worn stuffed animal, waiting patiently, hoping someone would notice her. And every time I picture it, I make a promise, not just to her, but to every child in my care: no one will ever make you feel invisible. No one will ever leave you waiting alone. I will always be here, fiercely, without hesitation. That day taught me a truth I will never forget: bravery is not always loud. Courage can be quiet, hidden in patience and trust. And love, real love, is not just a feeling, it is action. It is vigilance, protection, and unwavering presence. Watching my daughter reclaim her laughter, her trust, and her joy reminds me of how resilient children can be, and also how carefully we must nurture that resilience. The world can be harsh, but a child who knows they are seen, heard, and protected will always carry that strength with them. Her story is a reminder to all parents and caregivers: pay attention. Listen. Act. Because silence is never empty, patience is never weakness, and love, fierce, relentless love, is the force that keeps a child safe and teaches them how to trust again. And so, when I see her running freely, laughing, confident in the safety of our world together, I know that the quiet afternoon she endured has been transformed into lessons, into vigilance, into love, and most importantly, into a promise kept.